So the mistrust and skepticism of government doesn't end on Election Day. Many voters lack faith in institution in part because they don't have clarity about what is exactly happening. Our next guest is working to change that. The nonpartisan group USA Facts is shedding light on the numbers as part of an effort to make government data easier to understand for the American people. Joining us now, the founder of USA Facts, former Microsoft CEO, Steve Ballmer, who we'll also want to talk about the economy with. But first, tell us, what is USA Facts?
It's an initiative that I started in 2015. I was frustrated. I just retired at Microsoft. My wife and I were scaling dramatically our philanthropy. We're focused on kids and families in need. The first thing I wanted to know is, what is government doing and where does philanthropy fill in? Finding the numbers to understand what's going on with crime or education, what poverty really looks like in the country, where government taxes are coming in, spending going out. Whoop! That was quite a challenge. And if I wanted to have known more about a business, you can turn to documents with numbers in them, 10Ks, annual reports, and I decided I was going to go do that and try to put in place some tools that people could use for decision making using only government's own data.
Now, you know, this is a brilliant idea, Steve. I remember when I first got into Congress, there was something called Thomas, which at the time in 1994 seemed like a really brilliant concept where you could search anything, any of the debates in Congress and other legislation. But it seemed to have just stopped there. You look, whether you try to get information from the VA or Social Security Administration or other areas. I mean, you know, the Pentagon. They are working with data that looks like it is straight out of 1993, 1994. Why has there been such a reluctance by federal bureaucracies, by Congress, to update these systems to make that information accessible to Americans?
Well, frankly, my guess, there's no forcing function. There's no vehicle that demands that our politicians sign up and say, I understand, I've read these numbers, I think they're accurate. That's what businesses have to do. And the forcing function is people have to acknowledge that the information that they want is complete and that they stand by it. You see some of that, of course, in what's going on in voting, not an area we focus in on. But if you can't believe in the data and you can't have to attest to its accuracy, not a forecast about the future. Everybody can make their own forecast, but at least information about what's happened. Those are knowable, objective numbers, and we have to make government sign up to attest to them and use them.
Good morning, Steve. I think there are so many people in this country who are thirsty for this, which is to say just pure accurate data and information, because there is so much media, but a lot of it has a slant. A lot of it Americans don't trust. So I guess my question to you is, how do you break through in our media ecosystem where people are trained to watch certain channels or read certain newspapers? Some of them, you know, may have some bias to them one way or the other. Some of them may be not true at all. How do you get this information out there in a way that you did with, you know, when you started Microsoft, you learned how to use data and put it out into the world. How do you do that in this climate?
Well, ironically, I think there are a few simple techniques. Number one, you make the data very findable through search engines, just in case people are actually looking for it. We put the data out through social media and attract people to look at it. Right, left, we're looking to find everybody who wants an accurate picture. That may not be everybody in the United States, but people ought to know that background checks have surged. People ought to know that the murder and suicide rate remains constant. People should know these things as they participate in the important debates, no matter what side of the argument you take. And we'll take those facts, we'll push them out, and try to get people to understand a broader set of data with just a little bit more historical context.
Steve, Donnie Deutsch, nice to chat with you. Two questions. First off, let's just do a little bit of a shift. We're going through a low point in economy that in my adult life we haven't seen, and it just, everything bodes that it's going to continue to get worse. How bad will it get? And secondly, speaking of getting better, what are you doing off season to make sure the Clippers can dethrone the Warriors in the West?
Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you, Donnie. Take a look at our annual report. This is not the worst economy you've seen in your lifetime, and I know that because you're an adult. If you go back and just take a look at the information, whether it's 2009 or going back even further, I'm not saying things are good. But when we give context, even, for example, fuel prices have been inflation adjusted this high or higher over the course of the last 14, 15 years. So, where will the economy go? On behalf of USA Facts, I make no forecast. The thing I worry about, though, is whiplash. What we have, if you just look at the history, government action causes surges and declines. And it seems to me that we're in one of those declines right now, whether it's actions of the Fed, whether it's actions of fiscal stimulus, whether it's regulation. And then we have these other shocks on top of it. To me, one of the key issues will be, what do we do, for example, with immigration policy? We'd had a steady supply, growing supply of people working in the country, and yet immigration was off over 1 million people in 1 year. And today we depend upon immigration as a source of labor. Are we going to open our borders again or not? If we don't, we're going to see, obviously, more wage inflation than we would otherwise. Now, as to your other question, man, Clips are coming out firing this year. That's a basketball question, everybody. But I would say, and this is not by the numbers, it's not USA Facts style, we make no forecast, but we're going to have a really good team, Donnie, really good.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. And Steve, I wanted to circle back to immigration because, I talked to Steve Ratner about it. And of course, we're not talking about illegal immigration. We're not talking about the mess at the southern border. We were talking about Japan and how their lost decade went into 2 lost decades, went into 3 lost decades. And we're talking about how it's a closed-off society. It's a closed-off society as far as business goes. It's a closed-off society as far as immigration goes. Maybe that worked in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It obviously. And Republicans, people like Ronald Reagan, were the ones that talked about this all the time. The Wall Street Journal editorial page talked about this all the time. You have Thomas Friedman, who said when somebody comes here and they have a post-grad degree, instead of kicking them out of the country so they can go take their talents overseas, we should staple a green card to the back of their diploma, say thank you very much, now go out, create American jobs. I've got to think, with your background, you're a real champion of this approach for legal immigration, right?
I very much am. I certainly am for high-skill immigration based upon my experience at Microsoft. We want the most talented technical talent in the world here in the U.S. for their jobs and the surrounding jobs. I'll give you just a couple of facts. If you take a look at the growth in population in our country, immigration growth is essentially as significant as our natural growth from births and deaths. Also, if you take a look at it, if you look at the percentage of people who were born outside the United States in our country today, we are at a 13.9% level. That level has not been that high since 1920. It bottomed out around 5% in 1970. And if you look at GDP growth, it's productivity growth, basically, times the number of people, growth in that, times inflation. And we've got to make sure that our growth is coming from people and productivity, not from inflation.
All right, Steve Ballmer, thank you so much. And thank you so much for this project that you've taken a part in.